This morning we'll be doing some training on professional agreement modifications and professional invoicing. We're going to use a 5.1 agreement as our example. For those of you who weren't able to attend the prior session or perhaps weren't able to quite complete that agreement, you won't be able to follow along in this session without a completed agreement. So you can follow along on my screen and then perhaps use the recording to catch up later. But we'll be going through processing an amendment for a 5.1 using the professional agreements modifications BP, and then also entering an invoice. Along with the professional agreements modification, we're also going to go through updating the budget and the funding, just so you can get a feel for how that will need to be updated. With a lot of the agreements and amendments, it requires an update to your budget and your cost code allocation. So we're going to try to cover that at the same time. That will mean hopping between a lot of different business processes, but I'll try to be very specific and call out where I'm clicking around. So to start, I'm just going to show you that I already have a professional agreement entered, 5.1 that has an approved status. There's a couple of different ways we can see information about that. That will also show up in the executed commitments column in our cost sheet. There's also something called a schedule of values. If I open up this agreement, in the little hamburger menu, there's something called the SOV, which is just an abbreviation for the schedule of values. And then that will show me essentially what was awarded for this agreement. So for those of you who are in the previous session, these are the phases that we had entered and the amounts. Here's our 21,500. Schedule of values, functionality in Unifier is useful as we go along, because this will get updated with any amendments we do, and it will also reflect invoicing. So at a glance, you can kind of see where all the information from a cost perspective about this agreement in terms of current contract value and what's been invoiced to date and what's remaining. Let me close that. Now let's pull up the cost sheet quick. So if we go to budget and funding management and cost sheet, looks like this is already preloaded, but I'll click it again to refresh. I'll open up my project cost sheet, and I just want to show you where the costs for that agreement are showing up in my cost sheet. Again, the first thing I like to do is just collapse everything because it opens in an expanded all view, which can be a lot of scrolling for 179 items. Now, everything we've done so far, for the most part, has been in professional services. So if I expand that, expand my AE services, and then expand my design bid build AE fee, I can see all the amounts that I have allocated from my funding and the current budget. And then in the executed commitments column, column G here, these are the amounts from the agreement that we processed earlier. In many cases, this will match what your budget and cost code allocation is, but in my example, the design contract was for less than we actually had budget and funding for. So What we're going to do now is create a professional agreement modification to add money to the pre-design phase. We've already got 6,000 in budget and 6,000 in cost code allocation. We've currently awarded 3,000 to the designer for pre-design. In this scenario, I'm going to go ahead and add 5,000 to the pre-design phase, which will make this 8,000 that we need to commit, which of course exceeds our current budget and our cost code allocation. So we will need to update those first. So there's a couple of ways to do that. I personally would check your cost sheet first, see what you have committed against each line item, and then from the amendment proposal, see how much additional is going to be added to any particular phase, so you can see what you're going to need to change in your cost code allocation and your current budget. The benefit of doing that is you're going to see all of your money. So if you do have some contingency, you can see what your current contingency balance is. In this case, it's 180,000. So you'll know that we can transfer out of contingency to cover that additional 2,000 that we're short for budget and cost code allocation. So it might be the case where you start the modification or the amendment and then realize that you need additional or need to update your budget and cost code allocation. But I would recommend just coming to your cost sheet first and validating what you need to do before you even start that amendment, so that you can take care of it and not have to jump back and forth between your amendment and your budget and your cost code allocation. Now, in this project, I've already baselined the budget, so I'm going to need to do a budget transfer to move money out of contingency into pre-design for my budget. And then we'll also need to do cost code allocation as well. So I'm going to start with the budget transfer. Now, I know it's on my cost sheet. I just looked at it. I need to take 2,000 out of project contingency. And then move it out. Or it might be the case where it's additional funding and you would have had an additional funding request. As far as the amendment itself, it doesn't care what you do first, whether that's updating your budget or update your cost code allocation. It can happen in any order. So if it was an increase to the project, you would do a budget change instead of a budget transfer, but you could actually enter that before the funding request for that additional amount is even processed. In this instance, I'm going to use a budget transfer and just transfer from contingency. Going to go ahead and click create. I see there's a question about, can we update the cost code if the budget is not sufficient? Yes. So Unifier, for your agreements, so your amendments, invoicing, it's always going to make sure you have enough budget and funding at a cost code level, but it doesn't care what order you do it. So if it doesn't make sure that you have enough budget at a cost code level before you enter your funding or vice versa. It doesn't validate that your budget and funding match. That's just something that you should be doing. But to clarify for the allocation, yeah, you can only, and I don't want to, I'm just going to stick with the budget for now. I don't want to get people confused between funding and cost code allocation and budget transfers. So let's just stick with the budget transfer, and we will address the cost code allocation and funding in a minute here. So I'm going to do utilization of contingency. Now let's say I got distracted. I forgot how much I needed to transfer from where and to what. We can use that duplicate tab trick to open up the cost code. And I can just pull that tab out into a separate window and then have my cost sheet open at the same time as I have my budget transfer open. Now this is a lot easier to do if you've got two screens. But I'm going to go ahead and drill down into my design bid build AE services. Okay, so I can see for pre-design, I have 6,000 in funding, 6,000 in budget. I know based on the fee proposal that we're adding 5,000 to what is currently committed in the agreement of 3,000, giving us a total of 8,000. So I'm $2,000 short. So I'm going to be transferring from my project contingency to pre-design. So we can put in a description. It's optional, not required. And then select a reason. It's going to go ahead and select unbudgeted expense. Now it's a transfer, so that means we're transferring from one cost code to another cost code. So I'm going to do that in the line items tab. And then because I have my cost sheet open, I can see that I'm going to be transferring from my project contingency to pre-design. So I need a deduct from contingency and an add to pre-design. Two ways to do this. Again, we can do this one at a time or add two line items in grid view. I'm just going to do these one at a time. So first I'm going to add my deduct from contingency. I'm going to go ahead and select my contingency cost code, again, by clicking the picker button. And then I can just use the find on page to search for contingency. In this case, it's project contingency. And I'm just going to copy the code name and paste it into my short description here. The amount's going to be a negative 2,000. And then I'm going to save and add new so that I can add 2,000 to pre-design. So right now the total amount of my transfer is 2,000. Unifier is always going to validate that the overall amount is 0. So I know I need to add 2,000 somewhere. I'm going to go ahead and Select the cost code for pre-design, which is where I'm moving my money to. If this was additional funding for the project, and we were actually increasing the cost of the project, we would be using the budget change business process instead of the transfer, because that allows us to increase or decrease the overall project budget. And of course there we wouldn't be deducting from anywhere, we would just be adding our additional. Oops, I selected the wrong code name. Anytime you select something in a picker, you can clear it using this X. So I wanted pre-design. So when I search for pre-design, I do see it 3 times. So be aware of that. One is for design build entity fee. We're not in a design build project. At the bottom here, I see it as a CMGC AE fee. So I know that is not the right phase. But here I see it indicated with design bid build. It's 3 separate cost codes. So that allows us to report on what we're spending on pre-design based on a contracting method. Go ahead and select my pre-design for design bid build. And then put in my 2,000. Once I hit save, now my total amount is 0. If I come back to budget transfer, amount is still 0. If it's not 0, Unifier will give you an error. Go ahead and click send. And as you may recall from the budget and funding training, this is the PM or planner who will be updating the budget and the cost code allocation for funding. When you hit send, it's just going to go to the PM and planner for verification. So essentially you're sending it to yourself for verification. So now when I go to Task Manager tasks, I'll now have a task for budget transfers sent for verification. Because this is a workflow process and once it's done, you can't update it. We do have a verification in here. It's just meant for you to double check your work before it reaches the end of the workflow. Because if it's incorrect, you would need to do an additional budget transfer to correct the mistake. So I'm going to open up this task. And you may remember from the intermediate basics training, there are ways to kind of help speed this along by accepting it from this icon or using the action with preview, which would automatically accept it as it opens the task, so you wouldn't have to click accept. For anybody who wasn't able to attend the intermediate basics, I would recommend watching that recording. We're not entering anything on this step. We're just want to double check our line items, make sure that we're pulling from the right cost code and putting into the correct cost code. And then we can go ahead and send it on. We could make changes directly if we needed to. But once we hit send, there are 2 options. One, update the budget, which we'll see these impacts to the cost sheet. Or if we created this by mistake or in the wrong project or what have you, you could also cancel. In this case, we're going to select update budget. And then I'm going to click send. drops out of my task list. And if I go to my cost sheet, I don't see any changes yet, but I'm going to click this refresh. This little refresh icon here. Unfortunately, that expands everything, so you'll want to go ahead and just collapse or just scroll down to your design services. So here's professional services, design bid, build, AE fee. Under this approved budget changes and transfers, I have 2,000. So my current budget now shows 8,000 in my pre-design phase. However, I still only have 6,000 in my allocated funding, so I do need to update my cost code allocation. So we'll do that in the cost code allocation business process. So again, in this case, the overall budget and funding for the project didn't change, so I don't need a funding request. If it did, I would also need to enter a funding request, and then as part of that funding request, allocate that additional amount in the cost code allocation. Now, a reminder, you only have one cost code allocation in your project. For the life of your project, you will have multiple funding requests, but your cost code allocation, there will only be one, and you can just update that as needed. I'm going to go ahead and update the cost code allocation, again, as the PM or planner. This is a non-workflow business process, so you'll know the first thing we need to do is click edit in order to make any changes. Now let's see, do I still have my cost sheet open? Yes. All changes are made on the cost line items tab. Kind of two ways you can do this. One is just open up your cost sheet in another window using that duplicate tab trick so that you can see what your current budget is. If I scroll down to my professional services, and this is also going to show us the variance between the funding and budget. So there's the remaining allocated funds available. This just means this is a comparison of your cost code allocation and your current budget. So right now this is telling me that my pre-design phase is, I'm $2,000 short in my allocation of my funding. And then if I scroll down to project contingency, I should be over 2,000 as well. That's kind of an easy way to see the variance between your current budget and your funding. If I had updated the cost code allocation first and not the budget, then I would see a positive variance here, but it's still going to point out where it's different. So I'm going to scroll back so I can see my current budget column. Again, telling me I need 8,000 in pre-design. If I go to my other screen here on cost code allocation, I can see that my pre-design is at 6,000. So I'm going to want to change that to 8. And then click save. Once I do that, my total amount changes from 1 million to 1,002,000. So if I were to try to submit this, I would get an error telling me that I'm trying to allocate more money than I have in approved funding. And that's because we haven't taken that $2,000 out of contingency. So I'm going to go to project contingency, and we're going to change this to match what's in our cost sheet for current budget, which is $178,000. Oop. 178,000. I'll click save. My total amount will now be 1 million. And I can click submit. Again, cost code allocation, we're allocating our funding amount. It's a non-workflow BP, so there's no workflow to send it through. The only workflow for funding is for the funding request itself. So I'm going to go ahead and click submit. And now looking at my cost sheet, still looks like I have an issue because I haven't refreshed it yet. So this remaining allocated funds column N is telling me I'm 2,000 off on my contingency and my pre-design. So I know I haven't done something, which in this case is update my cost code allocation. But if I refresh this, I'm going to go ahead and expand this so I can show you a little bit better. And collapse. Now if I scroll over to that column N, remaining allocated funds, I don't see any amounts, which is a good sign. If I expand professional services, there's no variance here. And of course, what that means, and without even checking column N, I just need to make sure that my allocated funding column amounts are the same as my current budget. Now, of course, this is the case where we have full project funding. In some instances, you may have projects that you don't have all your funding yet, and so there may be an instance where your budget overall is different from your funding. But in order to process this amendment, we need to have $8,000 in our funding allocation and $8,000 in our budget. Because again, we've got a $5,000 increase to our agreement, which is currently at $3,000. Okay, so if we know that our pre-design is going to end up at 8,000 after this amendment, now we validated that we have appropriate budget and funding in the pre-design cost code. So now we can go to change management and professional agreement modifications. And if I click on create, I'm given two options. Just like the agreement itself, I can select an amendment to a consultant agreement or an amendment to the 5.1. I'm going to select the 5.1 amendment. And make this a little bit bigger. Again, you can always validate what you're doing here by checking that first tab. So I can see this is contract amendment 5.1. I'm going to put in my amendment number. In this case, this is my first amendment. I'm going to put in 01, just in case I run into double digits of amendments, hopefully not. Purpose for the amendment. So I believe there is a corresponding location in the amendment form that this populates. So there's this, and then there's also the modification recitals. And I believe a resource has been sent out to provide some guidance on the recitals. Catherine's telling me yes. I'm just double checking to see if I have that document to pull up. Okay, I don't. Catherine, is there any way you could send that to me while I'm filling out the rest of it? Just so I can pull it up. So under, I'm going to come back to purpose of amendment, but under contract recitals, we're going to select the original contract. So if I click on the little picker, it's going to bring up all of the professional agreements that I have executed in this project. I'm not going to see anything from other projects, but I will see the consultant agreement that I entered earlier and the design agreement. This is what we are modifying. So I'm going to select my contract. This is going to populate the fee, obligation to pay from the original contract. Fixed limit of construction populates from the original contract. If this has changed at all, you can update that. And of course, the principal rep will default to Ron Reed, but you can change that as appropriate. So I just got the file here with the recitals. So that there is some guidance to make sure we're putting in the appropriate recital. The 5.1 and 5.2 are right here at the start. So in this case, we're increasing the fee and obligation to pay. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that. So this is not the modifications. The modification recitals are on the modification recitals tab. So when I click there, I can add multiple recitals. This is a line item tab. And then we will indicate their sequence with a letter. So I'm going to go ahead and click add. Only two things to fill out here. Where do you want it to show? Or what is the sequence? So my first one's going to be A. It's in alphabetical order. And then I would just copy and paste the appropriate recital. So in this case, we were increasing pre-design by 5,000. So I would go ahead and enter my increase. So a total revised amount. So this would be the revised agreement amount, which we were previously at 21,500, so this will take us to 26,500. I will save. Okay. So now the last item is the cost line item itself. So this is what updates the schedule of values and the cost sheet. You know, we've told it in text that we want to increase pre-design by 5,000, but now we actually need to enter that in terms of dollars and cents. We've already updated our budget and our cost code allocation. Oh, and again, I copied that recital information from the guidance that Catherine had sent out. Okay, so now I'm looking at the cost line items tab. I'm going to click add. First thing you'll see is this reference field. So this is important to note. If you are modifying, let's say you are adding or deducting fee from a phase that they have already been awarded, you would need to select that reference. What this does is this pulls up the phases that have been awarded, and this allows you to change that amount. If you don't select a reference, let's say it's actually going to create an additional item in their SOV, which we don't want. Now, let's say they'd been awarded pre-design and schematic design, and now we are awarding design development and construction documents. Because these are new phases that they had not been previously awarded, then we would not fill out the reference. So again, reference is only when we're modifying a previously awarded phase. In this case, we're adding money to pre-design, which we had already awarded. So I'm going to go ahead and click the picker here. And you'll see it's going to pull up all of the phases that have been awarded. I'm going to select pre-design phase and click select. Now, what that didn't tell me is how much we already had awarded to pre-design. So if I still had my cost sheet open in another tab using that duplicate tab, I would see that we had previously awarded it for 3,000. In this case, we are adding 5,000 so that it becomes a total of 8. So I'm going to enter 5,000. And then we'll put in a justification. If you select other, make sure to put in a justification description. Go ahead and click save. So now we have 5,000 in the pre-design phase. I'm going to go back to the 5.1 tab. And now if I scroll down, I'm going to see my original obligation to pay, 21,500. Previous approved amendments, 0, because this is our first one. Amount of this amendment is 5,000, giving me a revised obligation to pay of 26,500. Now, there's no reason you couldn't enter your cost line items first before your modifications recital. So if you wanted Unifier to do the math for you so you knew how much to fill in that modification recital for the total revised amount, you could absolutely do that. And then it's going to update our appropriated funds with any changes since the original agreement. There haven't been any. We haven't increased the funding. We've just moved it around, so that's still at 1 million. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and click send. This creates a task for the project coordinator to obtain signatures and update the PO in Marketplace. So that is when they'll be also generating or populating the amendment template in Meridian, at least until we get the custom prints updated in Unifier. So as the PM and planner, I've entered all the information. I'm going to go ahead and click send. Which will then create a task for the project coordinator. So the project coordinator will see a new task in their task manager for professional agreement modifications sent for obtain signatures and update PO. I can open this up. I can see all of the information entered by the PM in order to populate the template in Meridian and get that routed through DocuSign for signature and update the PO. Once those are done outside of Unifier, the PC can then come back to Unifier and complete their task by attaching those documents and answering the couple of required questions here. So I'll go ahead and select create. Sorry, accept. And just like the amendments, we'll see some familiar questions here. What is the date of the controller's signature? Let's say it was yesterday. Have we updated and attached the PO? Oh, nope, forgot that step. So again, in attachments, I can go ahead and add both the signed completed amendment as well as the updated purchase order. So I'm just going to click browse, find my two documents, and upload those. Okay, yes, I've updated and attached the PO, and yes, I've attached the signed completed document. Okay, I'll go ahead and click send. And again, if for whatever reason the document didn't get through the DocuSign process and we needed to make revisions, we'll just select decline. Again, you'll still need to populate those required fields, but they do get reset. So that's not critical because Unifier is just going to reset them anyway. They do need to be accurate if you select notify vendor, because now we're saying that the amendment is complete and then FM accounting is notified. So I'm going to go ahead and select notify vendor, which is going to approve then our amendment and notify accounting. Click send. This is going to drop out of my task list, out of the PC's task list. And then anybody who goes to the professional agreement modifications log who has access will now see our amendment 01 with our new revised obligation to pay amount and the amount of the amendment. If I select it, I can also see that the status is now approved. Now, let's see where else that had impacts in the system. So if I go to budget and funding management and look at my cost sheet, There's a column called executed commitments, which reflects your current agreement amounts. So now that we've updated that agreement amount from 21,500 to 26,500, I will see that in that column. Again, I'm going to go ahead and collapse this. And I'm going to open up my professional services, AE services. And now I can see that my executed commitments for all my design, bid, build services total up to 26,500. If I expand that, I can see all the detail, and I can see that my 3,000 in pre-design is now 8,000. Okay. Also, it's updated my schedule of values. So if I go to my amendment, sorry, my agreement, you can also do this from your amendment, but it's easy to remember it from the agreement. So we still see our agreement for 21,500 because that's the amount that the agreement was when it was approved. But if I open up that agreement and access the SOV again from our hamburger menu, which will show in the upper right once we load. Select SOV. Just expand this out. So now my pre-design phase in the schedule of values is 8,000. So my scheduled value is 8,000, and that's important for invoicing because this will allow then the vendor to invoice up to that amount. I can also see my total is now 26,500. If I click on that 8,000, it's actually going to show me here's the professional services agreement record that contributed the original 3,000, and here's the professional agreement modifications record that added another 5,000. So I can kind of see the history. Okay. And again, we'll see that executed amendment under professional agreement modifications, which will reflect then the new revised obligation to pay. So by processing this amendment, it automatically updated our schedule of values. And that is what we're pulling from when we're entering invoices. So if we want to enter an invoice against something that we haven't processed an amendment for, you won't be able to. You have to make sure that amendment is processed prior to entering the invoice. So as we get additional amendments, you'll see those listed here as well. In this case, we've only entered one so far. So that is the modification. So now I'm going to show you professional invoicing next. So let me just pull up the workflow diagram, which I didn't show you for the amendment, so I'll show you that as well. So we just did a professional agreement modification, but just to show you the workflow that we followed. Just a PM or planner would create, send to the PC, who will then obtain the signatures, update the PO outside of Unifier, and then close the loop, or if need be, send back to the creator. So let me open up the invoicing. So in the invoice, the project coordinator will be entering the invoice, which is then sent to the PM or planner for their approval. And their approval in Unifier replaces their, or will replace their signature. And then it goes to the project coordinator to obtain signatures for the SBP-7.2. And if there's any issues during the DocuSign process, that can be declined and rerouted. So let's go ahead and create our invoice. You'll see there are no options when I click create in professional invoicing, because it's the same form regardless of the contracting method. It's the SBP-7.1. Apologies, I think I said 7.2 earlier. We'll enter our application number. This is our first application. The application date. So let's say this one was for August, and then we can do one for September. And this is just an invoice. These application terminology is related to the form. But right now we're just doing an invoice for the design agreement. So we're going to select that agreement under original contract. We'll select our 5.1. And then the invoice number. This will be the vendor's invoice number. This will not be the pay app number. The system will validate that it is a unique invoice number for that vendor. So just be aware of that. It's going to ask to attach the invoice and backup. So again, we can just attach that using our paperclip here. All right, so let's say this is our invoice and backup. I'm going to upload. For this next part, it's good to have that invoice open on the same screen. I don't have an example of one, but we're going to need those amounts to enter in the cost line items tab. I'm going to go ahead and select yes, I've attached the invoice and backup. A couple of clarifications we've gotten through the chat is that it will be a pay app for AE agreements. And if it's a pay application, the date here is just the date on the state form entered by the vendor. Cost line items tab. Okay. Bear with me a moment. Looks like my browser is crashing. So I'm just going to get back into the training environment. Now, I didn't hit save at all, but sometimes Unifier will save a draft if you've used a picker on the form. It's kind of a so although you'll always want to click save if you're working on something over a long period of time, there are certain instances where Unifier may have saved one for you. So it's always good to double check your drafts just so you don't have to redo something that you might have already done if your browser decides to crash or you get interrupted. So it looks like I've got everything, including my attachments. I just need to, yes, I've attached. And we'll go to cost line items again. Go ahead and click add. You'll get a little confirmation that says, oh, that's in construction. Now what we're going to see here is our items and amounts from our schedule of values. So we can see our scheduled value. Basically, our current contract amount is $26,500. It's showing me bidding phase, pre-design phase, kind of an odd order, which may not match the order that you're going to get from the designer. So you can resort on cost code, which puts the phases in order. Effective date will pre-populate with the pay application date. You should never have to change that. All we're doing now is entering the earned to date amount. So let's go ahead and put 4,000 in pre-design. When I do that, it's going to calculate some things for me. It's going to show my requested this period, 4,000 total completed to date becomes 4,000. I haven't done any invoices yet or pay apps. This is my first pay app, so previous payments is 0, and then it's calculating a percent complete of 50% for that one line item, and it's totaling everything up down here at the bottom. So my completed to date overall is 15%. Again, shouldn't need to worry about error check. It will do it anyway when you click save. I do want to point out though, any line item that you enter an amount for or interact with, as soon as you do that, it's going to show a little pencil icon over here. And what's going to happen is anything without a pencil icon, it's going to get dropped off when I hit save. So in this case, we just have our 4,000 earned to date. For our pre-designed phase against our scheduled value of 8,000. If I go back to the 7.1 form, I can see I don't have any previous applications. My total earned is 4,000. Amount of this application is 4,000. So the PC will go ahead and click send. There's only one option, which is submit, which goes to the PM or planner for review. I'm going to select send. Creates the application. If I go to contract and procurement management, professional invoicing, I will now see that pay app entered. It's going to have a status of pending because it's still routing through workflow. Again, the PC created it, sent it to the PM and planner for review. So they will get a task in their task manager for professional invoicing sent for review. So we see our task professional invoicing sent for review. I'm going to go ahead and open that up and accept the task. Everything's in a read-only format, but I can review. So you'll want to be double checking the cost line items to make sure that the earn to date values are correct and complete. And what I mean by complete is because we're always entering that earn to date. By the time you get to your third pay app, you might not be invoicing against pre-design anymore, but we still need to put that earn to date amount in so that the total is correct for what's been completed to date. And make sure the attachment, you'd be reviewing all of the backup and attachment, like for reimbursables and making sure the amounts are appropriate. Shouldn't have to worry about your budget or funding or cost code allocation because you've already ensured that you have enough budget and funding when you entered the agreement and any amendments. So the invoice is just going to be self-validating against the agreement amount. So there's no way to exceed budget or funding in an invoice because we can't exceed the agreement that you've already ensured you've got appropriate funding and budget for. So I don't have an invoice, unfortunately, or a pay app with backup, but you're going to validate that what they're invoicing for is correct for this pay application. And because we have a scheduled value, there's no way for the PC to enter an invoice that would be for an amount over what they've been approved for, because the system would give you an error. If we tried to put in 9,000 here, it wouldn't let us because we've only have an agreement and amendments that have revised this amount to 8,000. So again, we're just entering the detail from the invoice. by the PC. PC sends it to the PM and planner, and they're just double checking that they're not invoicing for a design phase they haven't started yet, and that their reimbursables have been properly backed up in the invoice backup. Okay, let me pause for just a moment here.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've reviewed the invoice as the PM or planner. I'm going to go ahead and click send. I have two options. Sign, it means it passed review. We're basically approving it as the PM. Or revise. This would send it back to the project coordinator to make changes. So if you notice that what was entered on the cost line items, they had 5,000 for pre-design, but the backup invoice that was attached only showed 4,000. Or if there were issues with their reimbursables, you could send it back for the PC to make changes in Unifier. Of course, also, if there are any issues with the invoice itself, that would be some communication with the vendor to give you an updated and revised invoice. So again, sign goes back to the revise goes back to the PC for revision, whereas sign goes to obtain signatures. Which is a project coordinator step. So in this case, all the amounts were good. The PC gets a task to obtain signatures. Again, this is a DocuSign step outside of Unifier, where the 7.1 is getting routed for signature. So I'm going to go ahead and accept. If there is an invoice with backup attached, we'll want to replace that with the signed version with backup. So with the signed 7.1, that's been routed through DocuSign. So if you have something without a signature that was initially attached, you can revise that. This is a little bit different process. You'll click the gear icon next to the existing attachment, and you'll click revise. This pulls up and you'll see the file here again. And then we'll click on this gear icon to browse and find our signed document. So let's say this was the signed version. The file name can change, that's fine. It will still track the previous version. When I click upload, Unifier is going to actually track both versions now. So there's a column here called revise with a check. That just means it's been revised. If I open it, it will actually show the previous unsigned version and now the new signed version. So if I click on that, I can just show you that quick in the Unifier user. It's always going to show you the most recent version first. But then it will list previous versions below that. So again, we want to make sure that we have the signed version. So have you attached the signed completed document? Yes. Again, if there's any issue that happened during the DocuSign, there is an option to decline. I'm gonna go ahead and click approve. This notifies FM accounts payable. And then click send. So let me pause, just resume.
Dina has a question quick before you resume.
Oh, okay. And so now that we have our first invoice entered, when I go to the cost sheet under the actuals column, we now see 4,000 here for our pre-design phase. That we can see so far, 4,000 has been invoiced. Of course, we can also see the pay app still under professional invoicing. It also updates the schedule of values. So if I open the SOV from the agreement, we'll see those amounts as well. So again, I've just opened up the agreement and I'm going to SOV. Again, this is all automatic, but this is a nice place to see all this information in one place, specific to this one agreement, because it's going to reflect all changes and invoices to date. So we can see our 4,000 completed to date, which leaves us 4,000 yet against our 8,000. So of the 26,500, we still got 22,500 remaining. Okay. Now that's important to note for this next step because I'm going to be entering the second pay app to show you how this gets updated. So if I go to professional invoicing, I'm going to see all of my previous invoices. So I'll see the one I've already entered, and now I can create pay app number 2. For the same agreement. So this we're going to call application number 2. The last one was August, so this one we're going to have September. And then we'll select our contract or the original agreement again. And then you'll notice there's construction invoicing and professional invoicing. So any pay apps will show in their respective logs. So in this screen, we're only seeing professional invoice pay apps. Going to go ahead and select our agreement. One thing to note about the schedule of values being updated by all these business processes is it does lock it, and that is to prevent or to be able to verify that you or prevent you from over invoicing against the scheduled value. And because of that, entry of invoicing has to be sequential. So if we have pay app 1 that was still pending, we would not be able to send pay app 2 into workflow until pay app 1 is approved. And that's because pay app 1 might be pending with $8,000 against pre-design, and then you enter pay app 2 with an additional 2,000. Because the first one hasn't been approved yet, Unifier can't validate that you're not over invoicing for that design phase. Okay, so we'll enter our invoice number. or the vendor's invoice number. And again, have we attached the invoice in backup? And we'll attach that again. This also applies to amendments as well. So if we've got a pending amendment, again, Unifier can't validate what's going to happen with that amendment until it's approved. And so in order to prevent anybody from over invoicing against an item in the SOV, you won't be able to enter an invoice until that amendment has been processed. Okay, so we're on application number 2. I'm going to go to cost line items. And this is the same spot where my browser crashed last time. Let me just refresh here. If you ever get stuck in Unifier, you can always log back in. And again, double check your drafts just in case Unifier. Don't rely on Unifier to save it for you, but it's always good to check in case it did. Hopefully we got our second pay app here. Otherwise I'll have to re-enter that. Looks like it did. Okay. So let me come over to cost line items again. Now previously we had paid 4,000 against pre-design. I'm going to go ahead and click add. This adds all of the awarded design phases. And again, I'm going to sort on my cost code just to get these phases in the correct order. So we'll see on the pre-design phase that requested this period is negative 4,000 because we haven't entered an earn to date. So this part's really important, and I'm probably going to say it twice. If we leave that as 0, it will remove 4,000 from pre-design. So we have to make sure that we enter the appropriate earn to date. So if we do 6,000, again, this is the amount to date, not the amount of this particular invoice, and that reflects the 7.1 state form. Now it knows that we've previously paid 4,000, so it's going to calculate a requested this period amount of 2,000. If you leave it as 0, it will cause some issues. It's really important once you've already paid out a phase, for instance. So let's say we're now on design development. If I only put in design development and I forget to put in pre-design and schematic design, it's going to back out everything that's been invoiced to date. So we're always entering the full earned amount to date. So now in this case, we're putting in, let's go ahead and put 8,000. Let's fully invoice out pre-design, and let's say that we're 3/4 of the way through SD. So we'll have 3,000 in SD. So now earned to date total is 11,000, but requested this period is 7,000, which is 11,000 less the 4,000 that we've already invoiced. So we can see our total previous payments of 4,000. So yeah, it's really important that this is in here correct. Otherwise, it's a bit of a pain to clean up because you have to enter corrective invoices. So the easy thing to look for is make sure that requested this period is 0 or positive. If you have any negatives, that's definitely a sign that you should check and make sure. You may have an instance where you need to credit something back, but that should be kind of your first clue that, oh, I might have forgot to enter something. So let's put this back to 8,000. Okay, so we've earned 11,000 to date. Requested this period is 7,000 because we paid 4,000 previously. Overall, we're at 41% complete. I'll go ahead and click save. If I go back to the 7.1 form, I can see my previous applications total is 4,000. I've entered 11,000. Amount of this application is 7,000. So we'll go ahead and send this on for review to the PM. And now my second pay app has been created. And we can see that from the professional invoicing log here. We'll see our pay app 1 as approved and pay app 2 as pending. So it's still routing through workflow. So that created a task for the PM to review, as we saw with the first one. So the PM will get a task in their task manager for review. I'm going to go ahead and accept. You'll see you can also access the SOV from the invoice. It's the exact same schedule of values that you see when you go to the agreement. So if you ever do want to see that, if I go to cost line items, I'm only going to see what's been entered. So sometimes it's nice to be able to pull up that SOV for a more complete view. I can see future design phases. Just be aware that current payment due is 4,000. This doesn't update until the invoice is correct or is approved. So if you do get confused when you come in here and see 4,000 instead of 7,000, that's just based on the last approved invoice. So just be aware of that. This only gets updated with approved records. Okay. So once the review is complete, we'll send it to the PC for the obtain signatures. Step, which goes to the project coordinators. Project coordinator gets a task for obtain signatures. Again, routing through DocuSign for signature outside of Unifier, and then we are attaching that signed completed document to the invoice in Unifier. I'm going to go ahead and accept. Now, if that had already been done and you'd already attached the signed version, I wouldn't need to update the attachment, but if there was an unsigned version that was attached, I would want to make sure that I've replaced that with the signed completed document. Again, we're using the gear icon and going to revise. Oop. And then the gear icon again and browse. Make sure we grab the signed completed version. And that'll just replace the previous attachment with the signed completed version. We can go ahead and say, yes, we've attached the signed completed version. And click send and approve to notify FM accounts payable. Again, if there are any issues during DocuSign or we needed to make revisions, we would just select decline. In this case, we're going to go ahead and click approve. Again, FM accounts payable is copied. And now our amounts in the cost sheet and the schedule of values will update accordingly. Go ahead and collapse, and I'm going to expand my professional services. And I can see now under actuals, 8,000 for pre-design, 3,000 for schematic design. And the schedule of values will update as well. Again, anything you click in the cost sheet will show you the transaction details down below. This 3,000 came from our second pay app. You can actually double click and open that pay app directly from the cost sheet, which is what I've done here, just as a shortcut to show you the SOV. Of course, I could also just go to professional invoicing under contract and procurement management. But because this pay app is now processed, our schedule of values now updates, and we see total completed to date of 11,000, requested this period 7,000, which is our additional 4,000 and the 3,000 against schematic design. And a remaining balance of 15,500. And that is invoicing. So let me go ahead and unmute.